Tris Dixon, author and chief editor of BoxingScene.com, speaks in an exclusive with Colin Nathan. This is no punches pulled.
In terms of Jake Paul, I'm not going to discredit him too much. His choice of opposition has been wild, but from the retired MMA fighters to the basketball players to now to 58-year-old Mike Tyson. Obviously, it's very sad that now Mike Tyson's got a loss to Jake Paul on his professional record, which is just bizarre.
Welcome to Omnisport, the ultimate African sports audio channel.
And joining me in studio is a very dear friend of mine, guest all the way from the UK, boxing writer, chief editor of BoxingScene.com, and the writer and the author of Damage, Tris Dixon. Welcome to the show. How are you doing, my guy?
And hopefully the writer and author of your autobiography when you're ready to pull the pin.
I'm glad you said that because, I don't want to put any pressure on you.
But yes, no, I'm doing okay, thanks. It's been a really busy year, and you know what? There's no sign of it slowing. Like all the way up to Christmas, obviously, Fury Usyk is on December 21st, and Anui's on Christmas Eve, and then there's a big Japanese show on the 31st on New Year's Eve, and then we're starting to get the dates through now for January. Boxer have a show, and February 1st it's Morel Benavidez. March 1st it's Tank, and Feb 22nd it's Saudi Arabia. Like it's a constant season, right? It's a constant flow of events that we need to be on top of. So it's busy.
Well, I'm glad you actually mentioned all those fights because I actually want to start off by asking you this question: has 2024 been a good year for boxing?
Do you know what, Cole? I don't think it's been a bad year, but a good year. It's not been a banner year. It's been interesting. It's kind of been a transitional year, right, with the influx of Riyadh season. And I think there's plenty of people that would say it was a good year, people who are heavily involved with Riyadh season. The rest of the year, Japan's been flying, but America and the UK, the American and UK markets seem to be lagging behind a little bit. I think the attention's been turned to Saudi Arabia and the big Riyadh season events, even the ones in Wembley in London and at the BMO Stadium in Los Angeles. Like they seem to have taken an awful lot of talent for those two cards from the UK bills, and it's left the cupboards a little bit empty subsequently. So, Cole, it's never perfect, as you know, in this crazy, wild, unpredictable sport. I think it's been a transitional year, and to be honest, I don't know how it sets up for next year. If this is a box set drama, I don't know if the season finale, if we're coming to the end of the season finale in December, I don't know how it stands for next year. Like I said, everyone involved with Riyadh season will be saying, "Oh, it's the best ever," and and all the rest of it. But those on the outside looking in, I'm not convinced, and I'm not hating on the situation. I mean, it's very much, we're kind of in a suck 'em and see process. Like we just got to see how it all pans out, really.
Yeah, and on that point of this year and Riyadh season, I mean, obviously the big talking point now would be, Alexander Usyk winning a split decision, which I didn't think was split. I thought he won clearly against Tyson Fury. And that sets up, obviously, December 21st for the rematch for Riyadh season. So before we get into the rematch of Usyk and Fury, I think let's talk about Riyadh season. They've come in with a massive explosion to the market. They paid fighters handsomely. They have taken a lot of talent and a lot of play away, particularly from the UK. You see America now infiltrating that kind of market as well. Obviously, I think the question is, when is Africa going to infiltrate that? And hopefully we can have some play in that as well down the line. But how sustainable do you think is this model of Riyadh season? I've heard inklings that they are making money on shows. Some of the shows are losing money. So what would be your guess, just looking at what's been happening to the market internationally with Riyadh season?
Well, it does seem like there's almost an infinite supply of money. So there are talks that, in certain areas it's being wound down already, not to a close, but like earlier projections and early amounts of money that people were looking at for various things are being dialed back to an extent. But even if they spend less, they'll probably still be the biggest payers in town. I think there's two things to it. Is when you look at this, the PIF and the investment fund in Saudi Arabia. And when you look at the amount of money that's over there, they're not just talking about a few hundred million. They're talking about billions and billions and billions. And that sort of money will go a long, long way in boxing, to the point, obviously, where they are talking about a league and creating a league of boxing. Obviously, and I suppose this is where I am with the sort of suck it and see viewpoint is, there are stories occasionally in the Financial Times of how they are dialing back international spending to focus on their domestic products, like the Neom Futuristic City. And we know that it's only a few days away before they're announced as the hosts for the 2034 Soccer World Cup. And I think that's based on not only stadiums that aren't built, but cities that haven't been built. So the expenditure over there is going to be vast. And are they going to be wanting to put money into boxing? And is there the return on boxing for them to keep doing it? And I think this is the thing, there's people out there obviously making hay while the sun shines, and that's great. But obviously if the money is dialed back and withdrawn, and they've created a league and they've created this and that, and they've just bought Ring Magazine and all the rest of it, what happens if they dial back? Does it create a vacuum that is potentially harmful for the sport? And all this stuff we need to see. I'm not passing judgment now, but I'm viewing the situation with caution. I'm not jumping in with both feet thinking, yeah, this is the best thing ever, because we've seen new iterations in boxing rise and fall before, and sometimes to boxing's detriment. And it's never nice when the sport's left to pick up the pieces. So we'll just have to wait and see. I'm neither a doom monger nor am I all in thinking it's the best thing ever.
So, it would be fair to say that there's an element of skepticism on the longevity of Riyadh season. And obviously, with the fighters getting paid so handsomely, if it does fall away or if it does not work out, what does that mean for the rest of the market? Because now you've come in with these massive fees that obviously the fighters benefit and all the players around them benefit. Equally, the promoters, they're entitled to make some money off their assets. What does that do if it doesn't work out?
Well, I think what we've seen is fighters who were used to getting that kind of money just don't fight, and they rest. And, we've had it in recent years with the World Boxing Super Series and with the fallout from the MTK situation, where there was a lot of money kicking around. And then when both of those stopped happening, when the MTK crisis when MTK fell apart, and then when the World Boxing Super Series was no more and that kind of money wasn't around, people weren't active. And you would hear from fighters saying, well, if they've made X from previous fights and they're only being offered a fragment of that now, they're not going to take the fights. So it causes this sparseness, and also it hurts the fighters in terms of inactivity. But I don't know, Cole. I don't know that is going to be an issue. I think it will be how far they go in, because obviously it's not just boxing. There's tennis, there's golf, there's soccer. They're involved with the WWE. They've been involved with the UFC. Their footprint is everywhere, and I don't know how much of a priority boxing is for them. It's, as it's hard to make money out of boxing, and the bigger the stars. I saw there was something about, and I don't know if this is completely accurate, but there was something about Usyk and Fury's purses totaling something like 170 million. I don't understand how you make that back. I really don't, because it's just not. It's not gonna. It's great for their fan bases, but it's not huge, I dare say, in the US, where there's a huge market. And it's obviously December 21st, close to Christmas, and people will be out and about and stuff. And I don't know how you make the purse money back, let alone the expenses. So I don't know. I don't know if, and the whole thing, obviously, it's not the whole thing with as anyone would say, is sports washing, though, is that they're not trying to make a return. The whole thing is it's for positive publicity, it's to attract tourism and to get people here. So all of these projects that I mentioned are loss leaders to try and entice people to go to the kingdom. And so really profit margins are not the be all and end all, but maybe loss margins could be. I just don't know.
Now, before we talk about the return of Usyk and Fury, and it's something that probably you and I cringe about, we have to talk about the sideshows. And when I talk about sideshows, I'm talking about Jake Paul. I haven't really watched a lot of his fights. I'm not really bothered. I couldn't sit and bear to watch a 58-year-old legend and iconic sports star in Mike Tyson going through the paces. For me, it was an event. It was not a fight. I thought that it was just a guy who's a YouTuber who's banking on that kind of exposure, who's done exceptionally well, don't get me wrong, and probably has improved as a boxer fighting. And I hate using the term fighting against a guy who in 1988 knocked out Michael Spinks in one round, who captured the imagination of me as a kid. Fighting a guy who's a YouTuber probably wouldn't have lasted around in his prime. We can't not talk about this because Jake Paul, as popular and as famous as he is, he hasn't chosen a tennis court. He's chosen a boxing ring. So the only benefit from my end is that it creates eyeballs to a boxing ring. But is this good? And obviously, is this sustainable for boxing?
I think that the sideshows are here to stay to an extent. I don't know that anything will top that. And it was hard, when Mike Tyson had his health issues a few months ago, it was hard to think like who might come in and replace him if needed that would draw that same level of interest. It's hard to think about that. In terms of Jake Paul, I'm not going to discredit him too much. His choice of opposition has been wild, but from the retired MMA fighters to the basketball players to now to 58-year-old Mike Tyson. Obviously, it's very sad that now Mike Tyson's got a loss to Jake Paul on his professional record, which is just bizarre to wake up and see that on BoxRec. But there's elements to this, isn't there? I mean, I don't think someone with Mike Tyson's mileage in or out of the ring should be boxing at 58. And obviously, you alluded to me writing damage at the start, and I don't think it's a place for a fighter. I think one of the things that I was saddest about the whole thing was seeing Jake Paul's ring walk and seeing how calm and relaxed he was when grown men and really good fighters used to poop their pants walking to the ring to face Mike. And Jake knew that it was going to be a relative stroll, I believe. And, I wrote in my preview that on Boxing Scene that I thought either Jake won relatively early or he might, in inverted commas, hold Mike up. And I was thinking that very much. Like, I think Jake could have been way more active and busier in the last half of the fight, but he just took his foot off the gas and coasted, which is sad. And it's surreal to say that about the fight of those two people. But obviously, as you say, Mike is nearly 60 and, it is what any sane person would have expected. It was kind of like the sort of thing that you would see on an episode of Jackass, where you sort of dare someone to hit you, and it was it kind of had that sort of sideshow feel to it. It's interesting you talk about the overspill into the other markets though, because obviously there was a lot of eyeballs on Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano, and that was fantastic. But I always remember a few years ago when my kids were younger, I think it was Logan Paul and KSI. I can't remember if that was the fight, but I remember Billy Joe Saunders was on the undercard out in Los Angeles, and I remember my kids wanted to watch KSI and Logan Paul, and I remember a lot of the arguments at the time were from Eddie Hearn, who was promoting the show, saying, "Oh, look, they're going to come for KSI and Logan Paul, but they're going to see Billy Joe Saunders and they'll get attracted to boxing and all the rest of it." Well, obviously, it was a nighttime event in the US, so we went to watch it in the morning, and I gave the kids had the remote control, and all they did was fast forward to the Jake Paul KSI fight, if that was the fight, and then they watched that, and then at the end of it, they switched off. There was no crossover into any of the other fights that they could have watched because they were just there with that thing in mind. And I think the Taylor Serrano fight, I don't think 50 million people tuned in thinking that was going to be a great fight. I think 50 million people tuned in and waited to see the start of Tyson Paul, and were probably happily surprised by what they did see. But I don't think it's being done strategically. I think it's possibly being done to placate the boxing fraternity, and I mean commissions, possibly journalists, broadcasters. I think it's being done to placate them by adding legit boxing events to it, and then you get the boxing personnel and staff aligned to it. But I don't really see a huge crossover. Like you said, Cole, you're a boxing guy. I'm a boxing guy. Like, it's not for us. We could happily not watch any of that stuff. It's just not. It's not real boxing.
Well, that's the thing for me, is that you can't. To me, it was more an event, and it was interesting how they marketed the event with the show Tyson back in the day in his prime, knocking out guys, and then there was those clips of Tyson sparring and training. But there were short clips, Tris, if you noticed. There weren't long 2 or 3 minute rounds of him training. So it was very interesting from that perspective how they actually marketed and put the whole fight package together. And I found that clever marketing, but rather sad, because, people in the street were stopping me and saying, Mike Tyson's going to knock this guy out. And I'm like, how so? The guy's 58 years old. He was considered washed up 19 years ago against Kevin McBride for his last fight. Even back then, 19 years, he's just going to be rejuvenated and come out and knock out Jake Paul?
Well, I think there's two things to that, Cole. I think the first one is, when they put these highlight clip montages together, it was the same for anyone. It wasn't particularly trickery in favor of Mike. When they put these montages together with music, whoever the fighter is, they do it. Obviously, they've got the beats thumping, and they've got the rat-a-tat-tat on the bags or the pads, whatever it may be. They never show the guy actually taking a breather or having thrown a 10-punch combination. They're not just guilty of doing that for Mike. That's just what looks good. But you are right. There was no clips that were really longer than 2 or 3 seconds doing the rounds, and they made them look incredibly impressive, incredibly glossy, the way that they threaded everything together, and it, the whole production elements of it, and the whole Netflix thing, apart from obviously the buffering and streaming issues that apparently happened when it was live because so many people tuned in, they really showed that they could do the job with the build-up programs and what happened on the night in terms of the quality of their production. Obviously, there's some technical issues, but so yeah, I think that's the thing. You can make, with modern science, with modern technology and everything else, you can make things look a certain way. Dare I say it, with AI, you can make it look a certain way as well. So it's an easier thing to do. Plus, Mike is good for 2 or 3 seconds. He was good for a 2-minute round, really, wasn't he, in Texas? But no more than that. And it's tough because I seem to remember around George Foreman's comeback, there was a load of older heavyweights came back, sort of chasing the bag, and then what was it? A few days after Tyson fought, Oliver McCall
made a comeback, yeah.
And Ike Ibeabuchi at 51 is fighting later this month in I think Nigeria. So there's a slew of these 50-something heavyweights. It's a dangerous game to be doing that when your brain is shrinking, when you've taken decades of punishment, and you're not well equipped to take the shots anymore. It's a very, very dangerous game.
Well, sticking on dangerous game and talking about guys who've taken punishments, Alexander Usyk goes up against Tyson Fury again in a much mooted rematch, in which Usyk won a split decision earlier this year. And a question, I was thinking about before we started recording the show was, who's taken more punishments in their respective careers? Remember, Usyk had a very long, extensive amateur career, but Fury's been in some real hard fights, particularly the last one. And then, of course, those 3 wild fights with Deontay Wilder. Going into this rematch, do you think Fury still has the fire in his belly? We saw Sonny Edwards basically after 2 rounds this weekend basically just gut it, which was very surprising against Yafai. Do you think Fury still got the fire in the belly to want to win this rematch?
Yeah, I do think Fury is a fighting man. I do. I think it's in his blood, and I don't think he will ever not fight and show his best, as it were. Even obviously rocking and rolling in that 9th round, he was still trying to fight back and saw out the fight. I think what you're asking there, though, Cole, is interesting in the sense that you're basically saying who's got the higher mileage, and Usyk's got Fury on amateur fights and he's had less as a pro, but he's probably boxed more rounds. But what you can't discount with Fury is the toll that period of time out of the ring and between fights has taken on him, where he ballooned up to 30 stone, which is, God knows what's that, 160 kilos or something like that. Incredible amount of weight. And he wasn't living the life. He's talked about illegal substances and drink and all of the issues that came with it. Like that does not help longevity in your career. So there's two very different mileages. I think Usyk has had some hard fights, and he's not a natural heavyweight, I would say. And so even the fights he's had at heavyweights have been bruising. The second one with Joshua was tough. Fight with Chisora was tough. Obviously, the first one with Fury is in the running to be fight of the year. And he'd had some tough fights at cruiserweight. Bellew gave him all he could handle for 6 or 7 rounds until he turned it around. And Breedis gave him a fight of the year contender. So there's been tough nights in there. And then he boxed. Don't forget, he was one of those guys that boxed in the World Series of Boxing as well. So the WSB with the 5 3-minute rounds. So it was borderline professional boxing before he even turned pro. So there's two different sets of mileage, and you're sort of asking who's going to creak first. And maybe neither of them will creak on December 21st. Maybe they both have another great fight left in them, but obviously they're certainly nearer the end than the start. Fury's 35, 36, and Usyk's a little bit older. They are in that. They're in that sort of, not, I wouldn't say last chance saloon, but they're in that area where they're certainly nearer the end of their career than the start of their career. And they are in that position where they could get old overnight, where they just show up and it's not there. And maybe that was the case for Sonny. And by the way, I think that was interesting what you said about Sonny Edwards. It's different. It's a very difficult position to be in where Sonny was, because even if he wasn't vibing it through camp, you can tell yourself that it might click. And I was saying this to someone yesterday. It's kind of like lighting a match, and you sort of striking, just hoping something burns and something catches. And for Sonny, I think he got there on the fight night, just hoping it would strike. And then obviously 2 rounds in, it didn't. And I think he did well doing what he did and trying to sort of turn it around as best as he could, as best as a guy without significant power could. And I give him a lot of credit for that, to be quite frank, because I don't know if you have. I've been in the ring when I've not wanted to be in there, albeit only as an amateur or in sparring. And it's not a pleasant place to be in, especially when you got someone like Galal Yafai bearing down on you, throwing, a lot of punches and heavy punches for the weight too. So yeah, with regards to Fury Usyk, I don't know, Cole. One of them could just go, and that sort of fight that they had in May 20, was it in May? Yeah, May could have taken them both right to the edge. One more hard training camp, one more hard fight could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. I don't know though. I don't know, and obviously, I think the best case scenario for boxing is that we get a clear winner in an entertaining fight, and there's no controversy.
Yeah, I mean, here's a question for you. Fury wins, where does he go? If Fury loses, where does he go?
It's the same answer both times. Joshua. It's the same answer. Anthony Joshua is the only fight left for Fury and his legacy. And, there's already talk about if he wins, then him and Joshua get to fight for the unified title. And if he loses, it's the only really bankable fight for both of them, and it would probably still fill Wembley Stadium here. But there's already been Eddie Hearn's already said, that he could see them fighting twice, once in Riyadh and once in England, or vice versa. So I think the logical fight for Fury, win or lose, is going to be Joshua. Even though if he wins, there will be, Usyk would be pressing his claims for a rematch, obviously.
And equally, if Usyk wins or loses, where to from here? Retirement? I mean, he's done everything possible, right?
Yeah, I think that's the logical move, because he's obviously even knocked off Dubois, who's now, they stripped Usyk of the IC, or Usyk gave up his IBF belt and let Dubois fight for it, and he's already beaten Dubois. So, I mean, there's no real obvious contender coming through. You can make a case for people like your Bacolis or whoever's, or Kabayel, or the winner of Kabayel and Zhang to fight Usyk, but you're sort of going out of your way to create a challenger, because he's cleaned out. Dubois, Fury, 2 wins feasibly over Fury, 2 over Joshua. What's he got left to achieve? It's tough, unless there's some smoke towards this Vladimir Klitschko coming out of retirement and the 2 Ukrainians put on a massive fight for Ukraine.
Tris, who's your pick for the rematch and why?
It's tough, that, isn't it? Because if Fury can get motoring and stay motoring, it's going to be hard for Usyk to negate everything that Fury brings to the table. But I do think that Usyk is just too smart, and he can continuously adapt, as he did in that first fight, and he can continuously think and mix, and he can fight in so many different ways. And so I think Usyk, based on the damage he inflicted in that 9th round, and I think he could arguably be better going into this rematch. So tentatively, I'm picking Usyk, but it's about as close to a 50-50. It's probably, I'd say it's 55-45 in Usyk's favor, but I'd lean towards Usyk.
Yeah, I'm also leaning towards Usyk, and it's interesting because I never ever thought that he could hurt Fury the way he did in that 9th round, where he pretty much nearly had him down and out. And incredible that Fury could come back and just carry on fighting and showing that instinct and heart. And as you say, he's a fighting man. So I think the rematch is intriguing, but I am favoring Usyk, and I think it's not inconceivable that he could stop Fury this time around.
Hey, let me ask you this. Would you have stopped it in the 9th round if you were in Fury's corner?
It's a good question. He was all over the place. It's a good possibility. I might have.
Because he was one big clean shot from getting wiped out, and if that had landed, you probably wouldn't have forgiven yourself.
Yeah, so very, very tough. Very tough. It's the heavyweight championship of the world. Sometimes you're going to make a decision that's not up to your fighter. Fighters are there to fight. The managers and the trainers are there to protect their fighters. So it's a very interesting question. I don't know, but I can tell you is really, really hurt at that point. So I don't know. So
if you were in the corner, then you would have been there, towel in hand, ready to throw it, and just seeing how he was riding out the storm.
Well, there was that, and also, the way his legs went and the muscle tone in his neck. But again, I don't know. His conditioning was amazing to see that moment out. It was also at the end of the round. The thing is that when you stop a fight, in my opinion, is that can the fighter get out of that position he or she is in? For example, if the fighter is really hurt and there's a lot of time left on the clock, and the fighter's deemed to be on that point of being defenseless, I would stop it. At the end of the round, I probably, they did let him get back to the corner, assess him. But if that happened at the start of the round, no question, I would have stopped it. It's a lot of thinking to do at that point, and you've got to make very quick, logical decisions at that point when you're at that point of the contest. So it's a good question. It's a very good question. Beginning of the round, stopped it. At the end of the round, it's got time to recover, make the assessment in the corner, look at him. But again, he was really, really hurt. Big credit to him for carrying on fighting and losing a split. I didn't think it was a split, Tris. I thought it was quite clear.
Also, I suppose when you look at Fury's recuperative powers and you think of how Wilder ironed him out in the first fight and he got up miraculously,
Correct.
You would possibly be giving your guy the benefit of the doubt if you know what he's done in the past.
Also, the question is, it's the championship of the world. It's a close fight at that point. Let's see what he's got. So I probably would have let him out for the next round, but I would have monitored him very, 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 very closely. Tris, final question of our chats. 2025. What does it bring for us?
Well, like I said at the start, really, I think we're in a bit of a transition, right? And it depends on what Turkey Al Sheikh and Riyadh Season want to do with the sport, and also what happens with the PBC and Amazon link up, and does Honda keep promoting like he's been doing in Japan, and what happens to the slate in the UK? It's really interesting. You'd like to think there's going to be some more bigger events in the US. I think that's probably what it was really lacking this year, is a big blockbuster. Tank only fought once in the US. Deontay Wilder seems to have sort of cashed in his chips. Canelo's had 2 so-so fights with Munguia and Belanga, which I think did great business, but they weren't the best fights that he could have had. Obviously, people still want Benavidez. And I think, I often hear now, because of the Riyadh Season involvement and everything else, the best are fighting the best, but we still seem to be closer to Tank versus Shakur, or Benavidez versus Canelo, or Crawford versus Boots. Like, those are the 3 probably the most obvious fights to make in terms of the best fighting the best, aside from Beterbiev Bivol, which I think we're going to get a second time, and aside from the heavyweights. But I don't know, Cole. I don't know. I would like to have a crystal ball. I'd be interested to see where it is 6 months from now. I think it is interesting that PBC are, they're going Benavidez, Morel, Feb first, and Tank, Lamont Roach, March first. That's a bit of a statement in and itself. And if they manage to get the ball rolling, then I don't think Top Rank are going to want to give PBC an unopposed run at US boxing fans. So then Top Rank could be like, oh, we better do some more business over here. And then, where does that leave them, bringing through people like Teofimo Lopez and giving Jared Anderson another run, and the fighters they've got. And there's obviously talk about Inoue fighting in America this year as well, which would be a sensational event. So I don't know, Cole. I'm cautiously optimistic and excited. And I think it could be a really interesting and impactful year. It's not often that I say that with that kind of level of excitement, but I actually think it could be a good year for the sport.
Do we see Tris Dixon going up against Jake Paul?
I think he's bigger than me now, isn't he? He's a tank. No, I don't think so. And look, hey, to be fair to Jake, he's a good level novice pro now. Like, we call it what he is. He works hard. He trains hard, and he is getting better. But the fact that he lost to Tommy Fury, who's now boxing in Misfits, and who never won an English title, let alone a British title, shows you about his level. But hey, he doesn't fight me, but he gets no doubt he makes a shed load of money and has a big fight or 2 this year.
Tris Dixon, thanks for your time. Chief editor of BoxingScene.com. This is No Punches Pulled. We'll see you again next week.
Welcome to Omnisport, the ultimate African sports audio channel. Live and on demand at omniaudio.africa and streaming data free on the MTN network in South Africa. It's where Africa comes to play.